Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Nothing Zilch Nada. We're your host, Xavier Dean,
And Jacob Green.
and this week is Jake's topic. It is a welcome to my NadaTalk. So, Jake, what is our topic for this week?
Well, welcome to my NadaTalk. So, to build up to what brings me to this particular talk today, this past week, so I've mentioned there's a few podcasts that I followed for a couple of years now. I actually did not fully get into listening to podcasts until I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And even then, it's not like I follow like a ton of podcasts. I follow a couple that I really like to enjoy. But one of those podcasts is Resident Arc, which I've mentioned in the past. They've had a YouTube channel for many years. It actually went through a couple of name changes before it exclusively became Resident Arc. And I want to say since 2021, they have been doing podcasts specifically on the story content of games. So if you've ever got into game narratives, or want to experience the stories of games or development history, I would check their podcast out. Starting on a couple of years ago, though, they started to delve into other topics, still kind of pertaining to games, but also on other topics too. They've reviewed anime episodes. They've done reviews on Studio Ghibli movies and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which that's a very in-depth discussion, and particular movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey or Jurassic Park, just to name a few. But they delve into other topics I think are worth discussing. They posted an episode last Monday on particularly about criticism in games, but it became more of a discussion on how to be a better critic in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been brought to my attention that in the past on this particular podcast, me and Xavier have talked about the flaws pertaining to social media and being primarily having everything be digital now, which includes discussion points too. But it's come to my attention, and this is something I've thought about for quite some time now. It's just that after listening to their podcast episode talking about it, it made me realize how even today, probably more so than ever, there are people that do not know how to give constructive criticism.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that needs to be taught, because there are people out there that are not as socially active, and hence they do not know how to give valid criticism in terms of expressing what they think.
Right.
So this week's episode today is about the art of constructive criticism, and I'm sure Xavier has stories pertaining to that, but I also have a couple of my own stories to share too. But I think our main discussion point for today should be about, through our experience and through the people around us, what you can do to be a better critic.
Mm-hmm.
For anything, could be commentary, could be political discussions, could be even on simple stuff like movie reviews or game reviews or book reviews, could be for anything, because it's valid to give to learn to be a very constructive critic and to be a strict critic, not in terms of like putting something down, but to really get nitpicky in the details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my personal opinion,
Mm-hmm.
because for the past couple of years, I've been debating on starting a movie review podcast. I'd say one of the biggest things about constructive criticism should be bringing up that it could be different for other people, especially when it comes to like movie preferences.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it also kind of depends for like how long you've been doing it for,
Yeah.
because there are people out there that are probably way above our age, that have been doing it for a long time, or they're older than us and are just like getting into the medium, but they don't know how to give a proper critique. So it's the question of, can you get better at this, or should you find something else?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like there's not really an in between for that.
Right. I feel like one of the main reasons why constructive criticism isn't great now
Mhm.
is when you have certain YouTube channels like CinemaSins that where they focus mainly on the negatives rather than the positives.
Mhm.
And a lot of their negatives are more just like, you know, oh, they said the title of the movie. This is, a typical cliche.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen those videos before. But the thing is, that's kind of different because those are treated as jokes, if anything. Not to say that none of their critiques are valid.
Oh no.
I'm sure a few of them are.
Right. But we
But
also come from a society where not everyone understands the jokes. So they could be seeing this and be like, oh, hey, this is how we should review. We should just nitpick all the negatives.
yeah, that's exactly, well, that's not the only thing. But like that is one of the main reasons, because when you got people, when their thing is to like bash something to like the most egregious degree,
Mm-hmm.
um they some people will get it. Some people who have been exposed to that type of entertainment for a while realize that, like, oh, they're just making jokes about it. Although there are comedians out there that kind of do commentary. I mean, just take a look at George Carlin, dude might as well be a commentator disguised as a comedian.
Right.
But I think another big reason as to why constructive criticism isn't as strong now is because of social media. And this is something that the podcast episode talked about, and it made me realize how freaking powerful an algorithm is. So the thing about social media, and we could throw YouTube into that discussion too, because you still comment on other people's videos
Mm-hmm.
and you're still like posting videos, but you're not like posting pictures or, well, I guess YouTube shorts could be considered to be like the Instagram and Facebook stories.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about an algorithm, a couple things. One, it's usually tailored to your needs specifically. So let's say, for example, your I'll throw in a music example. Let's say you're into orchestral music, you know, Mozart, Beethoven, any of those guys. If you're into orchestral music, then you're probably going to get a lot more recommendations uh, on your recommended page on YouTube or just the feed that you get on social media on that particular type of music.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing to keep in mind too is what posts usually gain more traction. It's usually um, the blunt ones,
Hmm.
the ones that are just like, oh, such and such, I'm so mad about this, or I'm so happy about this. Like those are the posts that get the more exposure rather than uh, the ones that are actually um, very thoughtfully put together, that
Hmm.
are critical, maybe sometimes philosophical. Um, Now you might be wondering, well, I see those types of posts on my feed. I don't understand how anyone else could see it. Well, that's still tailored to you. It's also probably because you're not part of the problem.
Hmm.
A broad assumption, but it's a valid one, you know, because like again, I listen to Resident Arc, so I get a lot of posts about Resident Arc, and sure, they have 100,000 something followers,
Hmm.
um, and like they've gone to like a million views before, but like barely have they scratched like that surface. Um, but again, that's considered minority compared to like people who have a very widespread following. And
Hmm.
usually, what people do when they post stuff is just like, what's going to get me the most traction? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing to think about because you have to think about that when you are a content creator. Because, like, if you're posting the same thing, but it still doesn't work out, or you start to lose your following, you need to do something to bring that back up. That is a valid thing to do, is to try something new.
Hmm.
However, it's the question of morality that comes into the picture of whether something is truthful
Hmm.
or honest. And more times than not, it's usually the dishonest and untruthful stuff or the stuff that gets it's like, oh man, what's gonna gain the most hate out of this
Right.
particular thing, you know? And it's just like, what the heck? What the heck? I don't like this. Um, So I think that's part of that. Two is the algorithm is
Hmm.
a very big part in that.
Yep, definitely. And
Bless you.
considering the algorithm, what was that?
Bless you.
Oh, thank you. And considering the algorithm, again, being tailored to you, it's going to bring up more things like that when you interact.
Hmm.
It's, you know, regardless of if it's detailed or not, which I feel like is another thing about some of these social media posts. Because I'll scroll through social media every so often and I'll see these posts where they make a claim, but it's not like a descriptive. They don't explain why.
Yeah,
So that's a big,
definitely.
well, I feel like that is a big part when it comes to constructive criticism. Just saying, "Oh, I hated this."
Hmm.
Okay, you hated it. It's when you explain why that there's a little more depth.
Yeah.
Well, I can go out there and say, "I hated the movie Borat." Cool. You made a claim. I could then go out and say, I hated it because, and I could explain all the reasons why I hated the movie,
Hmm.
and then I may have a little more validity, but not as many people are going to pay attention to it because it's longer. The shorter posts are the ones that are going to get the most interaction than the longer posts.
That is definitely true. That is definitely true for sure.
Hmm.
Um, since you brought it up, the oh I hate this because just because I hate it, it kind of brings up a little story that I want to talk about pertaining to criticism and some of my uh one of my earlier experiences in terms of being a valid critic. So in my undergrad, which I studied music performance
Hmm.
for saxophone for classical and jazz. Um, one of the things you have to do, pertaining to your primary instrument, doesn't matter what instrument you are, is you have to take uh, studio classes. You also have to take lessons, but you also have to take studio classes, which more times than not, you meet once a week. I know when I got my new professor in my sophomore year of my undergrad, we got more to 2 days a week, but that was more so for like a saxophone ensemble rehearsal, whereas the other one is for like master classes, people playing for each other, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I wanted to more so talk about the stuff. Well, a story pertaining to what happened during my first year of undergrad. So our studio classes, it was 2020, so they were primarily Zoom meetings,
Hmm.
and your mileage may vary of how well that worked out. But it was handled in a similar fashion. We played for each other. It was a rotation of different people, and it was just playing the stuff that you've been working on. Could be an etude piece, could be a jazz transcription of like a jazz saxophone solo or whatever jazz soloist. And, it was up to us, the students of that studio, to make a critique.
Hmm.
And for me, in the very first week of studio class, I learned a very important lesson. So I, right off of the bat, made a negative critique. I wasn't being like blunt or anything. I was pointing out stuff that the person needed to work on.
Hmm.
However, uh, my teacher quickly gave me a pointer that I still think about to this day. And that is try to lead off with a positive critique first before the negative critique.
Right.
And I can't remember his explanation as to why that is the case, but I think I figured it out what exactly that could be. In my mind, more times than not, like 99.9999% of the time, rarely is something going to be horrible and egregious and bad. The only time that happens in the case of a music performance is if someone clearly did not practice at all. Um, which again, your mileage may vary at that,
Hmm.
um, but rarely is that the case. And you have to point out stuff that they both excelled at. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because, you know, not just in music, but in all types of work and art, we are constantly trying to improve ourselves. And the best way for us to do that is to point out our weaknesses. And I'm not saying that that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, it could lead to you neglecting your strengths that you already possess.
Hmm.
It's like how when you're working out and you're working on your biceps and it's like, oh, your right bicep, it's doing pretty well, but your left one, like it's not getting the time that it needs. You know, I mean, sure, your right one could still use some work, but like you also still need to work on the left one too. Or let's go for a little bit simpler example of like you're working on your biceps, your biceps are looking pretty good. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm working more on my biceps and it's awesome.
Hmm.
What about your legs? What about your calves?
Right.
You know, those
Right.
calves those calves aren't getting as much work as they should. So you should probably start doing some exercises pertaining to your calves.
Hmm.
But it's a similar theme in terms of critiquing because I know in my case, in the past, well, even now, I am very nitpicky, and I can obviously tell when I'm doing something wrong or if I have weaknesses in my own playing or teaching that I need to improve upon. But if you neglect the strengths that you already have, then like don't ignore them. Just like make sure those things still get brought up too.
Hmm.
And I think that's the important thing when it comes to constructive criticism. First and foremost, it's just like you need to have that balance of both. You need
Yes.
to have that balance of both. And I
Hmm.
know in my case, I've never been a big fan of blunt criticism. I was always trying to be detailed. But if you're trying to be detailed, you know, because if you see everything from one point of view, then it'd be hard to see the other side.
Yes.
Some people only see the positive side
Hmm.
and neglect the negative side.
Right. And
And
then,
we and when we say negative, we don't necessarily mean bad.
no.
We're just saying that like these are stuff that could probably be strengthened up a little bit more.
Hmm. No, I agree with that. So I'd say my biggest example of this, because I was in school for education, specifically special education. And, special education, we go to these IEP meetings to talk about individual plans. My instructors would talk about how when you start one of those meetings, you do not start with explaining the goals or any areas of improvement. You start with the strengths because the parent's more likely to listen after you go through the strengths. And the same thing when it comes, or when it came to my observations. Whenever I would get observed, they would start every time with the positives. You did this well. You did this well. And then you did this well. And then after that, that's where they broke down what I needed to improve on and went into detail on how I can improve on it, which I feel like is a big part of constructive criticism. You're not just saying what it is, it's, again, explaining why or how you can fix it.
Mhm. And this leads on to like probably one of my biggest points in terms of constructive criticism. Again, pertaining to not a story, but something that like occurs often. But I saw it a lot in my uh, sax studio classes when my new professor came in.
Hmm.
So I've mentioned already how I'm not a big fan of the blunt criticism. So sometimes, and I've had this happen to me myself, not me giving the critic, but me being critiqued. Um, and even now, I experience this through some of my instructors. You know, well, not all of them, maybe just a couple, but uh, what can end up happening? This can happen to someone like either they do not know how to make a detailed critique because they don't bother to, or because they just don't have enough experience. Um, like in my undergrad a lot, like I'm not saying this to place to say that I have a high ego or that like, oh, I'm the best musician out there, but people were literally viewing me and telling me that like, oh, you're one of the best musicians out there in this school, like you're such a great player and whatnot. Um, and sure, like that's nice, but it doesn't help me to grow as a musician, because what can end up happening, and this happens for both the positive and negative side of things, is that people will tell you like after you play, oh yeah, this sounds so good, or it's just like, oh yeah, this sucks. Now I've rarely had like the, oh, it sucks criticism, but
I say it all the time, but that's
I've
more for a
seen,
joke.
yeah, but I've seen it with other people. Um, but whether you're on the positive or negative spectrum of it, it doesn't really help anybody. And my professor was adamant about not having critiques like that, because it's because you're not looking deep enough, you know. And you kind of have to think outside the box a little bit, because this can be hard, especially if you're talking about a musician that already has their fundamentals down. They barely have a flaw in terms of their technique or the way that they play. Let's say, for example, you're critiquing a musician that already has a good sound, that already has great articulation. um, what about what's happening with their fingers? Are they playing stiff? Because if they're playing stiff, then that means they're not being relaxed enough.
Hmm.
And so that is a critique that you can give. You can tell them, hey, I think you could be relaxed more. Or it could be just like, oh, you probably shouldn't be moving that much when you're playing. Maybe you could try and ease that out a little bit. you know
Hmm.
and again, at the end of it all, some of it is personal opinions, but you also have to take those opinions and really think about it. And it's just like, oh, I've not noticed that before, I should probably notice that more. That's the whole point of lessons, and that's the whole point of having a studio class. And this is me going on a tangent a little bit, but currently, where I go to school at, we do not have studio classes. And I so wish we do, because there are just people out there that are not that aware of what other people are working on. And for most people, I don't. I only get to hear them at like a couple of performances, and that's it. There's no get together of just like, okay, let's sit down together, let's perform with each other. Maybe we have time for just two or three people, whatever. Let's get those performances in, and let's critique them. And everyone needs to get a critique. My professor was adamant about this too. Everyone needs to get a critique. I try to have it where I find both a positive and a negative one. Every time, it does not matter. I need to, and sometimes it can be hard for one or the other, but I make it my goal to find that, because I try not to think of every performance as brilliant, even if there are brilliant moments. And I don't want to think of every performance as trash, even if there are some moments where they kind of stumbled a little bit.
Hmm.
But my whole point with that is like, people, especially on social media, just make blunt critiques without realizing that it may not help the other person whatsoever. And social media pushes for that.
Hmm.
They push for that. And even stuff outside of social media. Like if we talk about the news, like the news is all about less detail, bold fonts. This is the one sentence with actually it's not really a sentence, it's more of a statement. This is the statement, and you're supposed to base the information off of that, just ignore all the little detailed words and such that we are talking about. This is what it is, this is how it is explained to us, and you must believe it to be so.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I want to stop one thing about criticism, it'd be let's stop making these things blunt. Please, please, because you're not helping anybody whatsoever if you give a blunt critique.
No, you are not.
Have you had experiences with blunt critiques?
I personally don't believe I have.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, when it came to especially how education and special education work, it
Mm-hmm.
was always, you know, start with positives and then we go through your areas of improvement and what, like, how you can fix it, why it's an area of improvement. Never once is it like blunt, it's descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Yep. So I've never had an experience for that.
Yeah. But the thing is, one of the things that we should talk about, we've kind of mentioned this briefly already, but um, the differences between an opinion, a claim, and
Hmm.
a fact. The
Yep.
differences between those three things. So, and I know it's gonna be one of those things. It's just like, guys, we know what those things are. It's just like sometimes we need a reminder of even the basic stuff because we tend to overlook it sometimes.
Yes.
And I'm not just talking about people. Like sometimes that happens to me, you know. Um, but something as an opinion, let's take a basic example. Like, I don't like the cold weather.
Hmm.
That's an opinion. That is an opinion. I don't like the cold weather. I don't like it. I don't like it whatsoever.
Don't
Um,
like it, Sam. I am.
um, but let's add on to this. It's like, okay, I don't like the cold weather because of how windy it gets, because of how dry my skin gets,
Hmm.
and it's just too much of a nuisance to me. Okay, that's a claim.
All
You're
right.
turning that opinion into a claim. Um, and maybe just to add on to this, okay, why is the weather so cold? It's well, because we live more up north and we're still
Hmm.
in the early parts of the year. I say early, but this is literally March 1st now when we're recording this.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but we live more up north,
Hmm.
and the the weather patterns show that the wind is more coming from one direction to the other. Okay, that's a fact. That's a fact because it's been researched, it's been analyzed,
Hmm.
and we could see from that particular graph that that's true. Although I do want to specify that, like, just because you have graphs and analytics and whatnot, that doesn't necessarily mean it is a fact because um, you may be stating it as a fact, but it also can show like, oh, maybe you skewed the information a little bit, or there's some slight miscalculation or something. And that can happen when you're looking at particular weather patterns or some type of environmental thing. That can happen. But more times than not, it can happen to people too. It's like if you think, for example, that like, oh, such and such person stole candy from a baby.
Hmm.
It's
There's
like,
there's no
okay,
proof that I did that. Just gonna point that out there.
oh no, I've seen it. Xavier's got more of a sweet tooth than my nephew does.
Nope, nope, no proof.
um, but like I saw such and such stole candy from a baby. Okay, I maybe some people would believe you if that were the case, but let's actually check and see. Now, if you actually did steal candy from a baby, okay, that's a fact. That's a
Hmm.
fact that he stole candy from this baby.
Again,
Um,
there's no proof.
because because uh, because you're just stating a claim at that point that like, oh, you just saw someone stealing candy from a baby.
Hmm.
But what happens when you go to this guy and he's just like, oh, no, I was giving candy to the baby.
Hmm.
Or like, I was giving candy to the mother of this child or the father or whatever, you know. Um, Knowing those types of differences is it's important when it comes to constructive criticism to know the differences between them. And it can be hard sometimes to validate that, but that's why research is important. I think if we take anything, people state opinions and claims more than facts. Like hard research, whether it's through books or on the internet or some type of scholarly resource or whatever. Like, we need to actually research more facts instead of taking things at face value of like, oh, this person says such and such, or I was told that by the news.
Hmm.
Like, sure, there are ways of getting information. And I'm not saying everything that they say is a lie or that everything is false. There is some truth to it. But with how things get skewed today, even if there is like video footage or just a photo of like, oh, this person was there. Oh, we don't know what he's doing though. Like, you're immediately putting a negative connotation on that when you do that. And sometimes, well, more times than not, it's unnecessary.
Hmm.
It's unnecessary. I mean, sure, you can raise your eyebrows all you want, but like, do the research first.
Hmm.
Can
Yep,
you do the one eyebrow raise?
I can do them both one.
Oh man, I can mainly do it with the right one. It's hard for me to do it with the left one.
See, I can do it with my left one. I struggle with the right one.
Yeah. So, do you have anything about that, Xavier, for opinions, claims, and facts?
Not really. You pretty much tackled everything that I would have brought up.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, what have I not said yet in terms of constructive criticism that you think it's valid?
I don't know. I think you pretty much said everything we needed to.
Hmm. Well, I think maybe just to cap it all off, I think constructive criticism is something that we're lacking. in today's society, more so than ever. Again, with the advent of social media, more so on Instagram and Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
maybe YouTube. Well, I shouldn't say maybe. Sometimes it's YouTube. Um, but with those types of platforms and how much we're encouraged to spread like hateful information or to like or approve hateful information, that's what makes the social media companies money. It's because they do not care if something is truthful or how false or how true a claim is because they support it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not support it, but like they just care about the monetary value that comes from it. And I think that we should try and change that, and like it with these types of things, not everyone is going to be on the same page. I'm not saying to turn off your Facebook or Instagram. I mean, I have for a few weeks because of currently in the season of Lent.
That's why
Um,
you haven't sent me anything.
no, um,
All right, just let you know when you get back, I might have an equal amount of things sent to you. Uh,
I'll check it every. I'll check it like every Sunday because Sunday you are allowed to have the stuff that you've given up, but I still don't have my Facebook or Instagram pulled up. I'll pull it up on my computer, and I still have Facebook Messenger because there are people that still message me on there. And I'll still go on Instagram and Facebook if I have to like post gigs, which I do have quite a bit of gigs this month.
mhm.
But um but I've stayed out of that. Part of the reason is because it can be a distraction sometimes. I mean, I've gone as far as to like turn off my notifications for both apps because it's just become so much of a nuisance.
Mhm.
Um, but the other thing is, it's just like, you know, you get exposed to so much toxic stuff out there with
Mhm.
opinions and claims and all this different stuff coming about you. It's hard to process all of that, you know, unless your feed is like, I don't know, watching dogs goofing off or something. That's that's fine.
Mostly I have like text messages between superheroes that are done in a comedic fashion.
Mm, yeah, but uh, no, constructive criticism. I just think it's just something that we all need to try to improve upon. And there are tons of research articles online of how to get started with it. And check out that podcast episode too by Resident Arc. Um, I need to look up the title of the episode, but Xavier, do you have anything to cap it off?
I have nothing to cap this off. Again, you pretty much said everything that I would have said.
Okay. So um so it's the state of the art podcast is what it's called.
Hmm.
Uh and the title of the episode is You're Doing Game Criticism Wrong and It's Destroying Your Life.
Hmm.
Um it's a really great episode to check out if you want to know how to do criticism effectively. Again, they mainly talk about games, but it goes for anything. It goes for anything. And if you feel like you cannot give constructive criticism to something, then move on to something else, because what are you doing to help somebody if all you're going to do is be blunt?
That's true.
But with that, that is the end of this podcast episode.
All right. So we will see you next week, and I can't say for certain, but there might be a chance for our first special guest next weekend.
Ooh.
Or that I'll get an envelope for what the special guest would say. But regardless, there's something big planned for next week.
Ooh.
But with that being said, I'm Xavier Dean,
I'm Jacob Green.
wishing you a wonderful night. Stay warm, or for those of you who are actually in warm weather, stay cool. And we'll see you next week.